So in this video then I thought that I would discuss the story of what it was like to travel before the internet. So the internet was first launched on August 6th, 1991. Not many people actually knew that it was launched at that time, however, because it wasn't a media announcement of, yay, the internet is here, everybody get on your computers and you can now Skype with your friends or whatever. It was just the sort of official public launch of it being available, but it took several years for it to actually become popular. So I remember the first time that I ever used the internet was in the winter of 1996, and I was a wandering vagabond at the time. Those are stories that I want to tell more of in the future, my experiences traveling around during the 1990s. But in winter of 1996, then I was visiting my brother, who was going to school at the University of California, Santa Cruz, in Santa Cruz, California, on the ocean there. I camped in the woods for a week and hung out with my brother during the day when he had time available. And at one point then I was wondering about upcoming rainbow gatherings. So rainbow gatherings are festivals in nature, like hippie festivals with dancing and drum circles and music and communal food and all kinds of stuff going on that obviously won't be happening now because it is the current, global crisis situation. I guess that those will probably be banned for this coming year and who knows how long. But anyways, back in the good old days when we could all gather together and have fun hanging out with groups of people, then I like to go to these rainbow gatherings. I, was aware of the internet and hadn't jumped on it right away because I was kind of like, well, what's really the use of it? Do we really need it or whatever? And then I learned that they were posting the rainbow gatherings online, the locations and dates, and so I decided to go ahead and check it out and give it a try and see if I could find out about where a rainbow gathering was happening coming up, something like that. And so that was in the middle of my 1990s travels throughout the United States. So those were domestic travels for me. I was just hitchhiking around and going to these gatherings and working on farms and just kind of extreme vagabond style of traveling. But my first international trip was in 1990, the day after I turned 18. Then I hopped on a flight to London, England, and began a trip around Europe for the next almost 4 months. And it was an amazing experience, going to 10 different countries of Europe and hitchhiking the entire length of the United Kingdom from London down to Land's End in Cornwall in south-western England, and then hitchhiking all the way to the top of Scotland and then across to Ireland, etc. And so I thought that I would tell the story of that trip in the context of what it was like to travel without the internet being available to you, or cell phones, or any of the technological stuff that we take for granted today. It was much more simple, bare bones. And so I'll give just a little bit of a backstory, what happened prior to that trip and how I managed to save up the money for it. As I said, then I was 18. I just turned 18 when I got on a flight and started this trip. And I hadn't started it earlier because my parents wanted me to wait until I was 18 before I traveled internationally, for obvious reasons. This was in May of 1990. I had graduated from high school a year earlier in June of 1989 because I skipped 8th grade, and so I actually graduated just after I turned 17 as opposed to when I was 18. And so after graduating from high school, then I went to a community college for a semester, and I was just thoroughly bored and wanted to do something other than sitting around in the classroom, and had been itching to travel for several years because of, reading Mark Twain and various other books. And my parents had actually done a hitchhiking trip around Europe when they were in their 20s and had told me some stories of that adventure of theirs. And so I just wanted to get out of school and do something different. So I got a job at an ice cream scooping parlor, worked there for several months, saved some of the money, and then I also sold a computer that I'd had for my college, the one semester of community college, and traveling was more of a priority than having a computer. So I sold the computer, I sold a baseball card collection for a few $100, and then I got a little bit of money for my birthday right before I left, and altogether then I had $1,300 for this all-summer trip. So if you do the math on that, It comes to $11.60 that I spent per day for this trip around Europe, which just sounds kind of ridiculous, but for one thing, that was 30 years ago and things were cheaper. Hostels were just a few dollars. I had a tent and a sleeping bag. I did a lot of camping. I was hitchhiking, as I mentioned. The $1,300 was just for the daily expenses, so that didn't cover my flight. That was already paid for. And I also had a Eurail pass for a couple of months that I'd already paid for as well. So the $1,300 was just for my daily expenses. So $11.60 a day, and that covered my hostels. I very rarely stayed in a private room. I can remember one night in Thessaloniki, Greece, in which I got a private room. Probably, oh, that's right, in Paris, France, I got a private room with a couple of other American guys that I met, and there were probably a couple other times, but mostly hostels, camping, hitchhiking around, sleeping on beaches, and managed to do it nice and cheap. And so the most important thing that I had with me for information while I was traveling was a guidebook, a Let's Go guidebook for Europe. And so, I haven't been traveling with guidebooks much the past number of years. I just use the internet and, book my accommodation online and find out information from various other sources, talking to people, places to go, stuff like that. But a guidebook is a pretty good idea, even now, because you can then have all in one place a resource of information about where you're traveling to and find out the best places to go, compare, well, should I go to this city or go to this other city, and read about them, and then you can find out. Now, of course, you can look on YouTube, of course, and find videos and lots of online resources, but it's nice to just, have a cup of tea and have your book and sit there and read about the various places that you're thinking about going on your trip. And so I had this guidebook, and that was especially crucial then, because that was really my only source of information other than talking to people and getting local recommendations and stuff like that. But as far as finding hostels and hotel rooms, where you're going to stay, then that was basically it. Otherwise, it was just show up in town and walk around and look for a hotel on the side of the street or whatever, and go in and ask how much they cost. But the guidebook was super crucial. And so I landed in London, England, and I was, pretty clueless. This is my first international trip. I'm 18 years old. I'd done a little bit of hitchhiking back in California. I had actually started hitchhiking when I was a kid. I've already, told this story in, other videos in my books and stuff like that. But I'd done a little bit of hitchhiking around California, some little hitchhiking trips outside of town. Otherwise, I was, green on the international traveling. And so it was just a stumbling experience of getting there and then go to the information desk at the airport and ask them how to get on the tube and get into London. The tube is the metro system there in London. And so my first day was a complete and utter fiasco there in London, because my plan was to go to a campground instead of a hostel. I just had it in mind that I wanted to stay at a campground and be able to spread out my stuff and not be kind of crowded by other people, and stay there for 2 nights and then have a full day just to kind of get mentally prepared for the adventure ahead. And so I guess that I had found out about this campground in London in my guidebook, reading about it. And when I got to the information desk at the airport, then I asked them if they had a map. And so to the best of my recollection then, on the map, I was not able to find out which exact campground I was going to be going to. There wasn't like the name, there was just a key showing the different things on the map, and then there was a triangle that indicated a campground. And so I decided to shoot for this campground. So I get the metro into the city, and then I start just walking around with my big old backpack trying to find this campground. And so it turned out that I had actually mixed up the symbols on the key. There was like a green triangle and then another green triangle with something on top of it or something like that. 2 symbols that looked very similar, and I had mixed them up, and I had gone to the completely different part of town from where the campground was, and I was in like the middle of London, where it didn't make sense that there would be a campground there. Eventually I realized my mistake, and I then got a taxi, and just to make a long story short, because it literally ended up taking me 8 hours from when I left the airport to when I finally actually got to this campground. And it was 8 hours of just like wandering around London with my backpack in the hot sun. It was a hot sunny day in early May. This was May 2nd that I arrived. Finally, I just decided to get a taxi, and he was able to understand where I was trying to get to, and just paid for a taxi and got to this campground and got checked in, stayed there for 2 nights, and then I got up on the second morning, packed up, ready to go, and I don't remember exactly how I decided where to start hitchhiking, but somehow then I got to a on-ramp for the freeway heading in the general direction of Cornwall in the southwestern part of England and going towards Stonehenge. I had a big map of England, or maybe of the entire United Kingdom, or maybe it was a regional map of that part of England, something like that. But I had a big fold-out map with all the highways and everything on it, and so that was going to be my ultimate guide for getting around. And somehow I managed to get to the right place to start hitchhiking and stood there. It didn't take too long when a lorry driver, the lorries are the trucks driving stuff around the United Kingdom, stopped and picked me up and was going quite a ways and got me a long ways, in that direction, out into the countryside of England and everything, and then kept on with the hitchhiking. I forget which town I stayed in that night, but I think it might have been the town that is closest to Stonehenge, and I stayed at a hostel, I remember, there. I assume that it was a hostel that I found in the guidebook there, and I can't really remember exactly, how I managed to find these places, especially while hitchhiking without having a car. I really can't remember. It must have just been such a pain in the butt to get dropped off somewhere, and then you're like, okay, where the heck am I? And I don't necessarily have a detailed city map. Obviously no smartphones, no Google Maps. You're just on your own, wandering around, asking people. That is a big one, is asking people, where is the hostel, or where is something that's near the hostel, or where is the center of town, or where is a good restaurant. And so somehow I managed to get to this hostel, and I remember the next day I was planning to go to Stonehenge, and I ended up changing my plans and didn't go to Stonehenge at all, and I've actually never been to Stonehenge, because I realized it was just going to be really complicating trying to get out there without a car, trying to hitchhike out there. I was kind of just excited to keep on moving and make some progress, and so I skipped Stonehenge, and it is still on my list. I still want to go back there. It is like one of those bucket list things, even though I know it's not going to be that spectacular compared to other things, but just the fact that I skipped that wonder of the world at that time, then I want to go back there. But thinking back on it, I'm really glad that I did skip going to Stonehenge, because that would have shifted my entire timeline of everything that happened on the rest of my trip, by like half a day or maybe a full day. And I wouldn't have met all the people that I did end up meeting. Everything would have been completely different for that trip. People that I met through just pure synchronicity and then ended up being like lifelong friends. That's the way that it goes when you travel, is just little things can make, all the difference of what happens on the rest of your trip. But anyways, I continued on my journey and got down to Cornwall, and again stayed in hostels that I found through the guidebook and kept on hitchhiking. I then started going north. I had the idea in mind to get to John O'Groats at the top of Scotland. I don't remember how I found out about that, but probably in the guidebook I read about it as being the northernmost point of Scotland. One experience that I remember that kind of, captures the experience of trying to navigate and find where you're staying without having the internet available is that I got into a city and I went to a hostel and they were full up. I forget exactly why I decided to just kind of scrap the whole idea of staying at a hostel there. Maybe they'd said that like most hostels were full or something, or maybe I tried another hostel and it was full, and I just decided, screw this, I'm going to just go camp. And so I just started walking out of the city. It wasn't a big city, and I got to a park, a big park with kind of rolling hills and lots of trees, and I just camped in the park for the night. The next morning, I was awoken by the sound of a horse, and a police officer, I think they're called bobbies, was on this horse, and he was speaking to me in the tent and asking, who are you, what are you doing, and stuff like that. And so I get out of the tent and go talk to him, and he's really nice. I explained I tried to stay in a hostel for the night and couldn't find a bed that was available. So he just said, well, you can't actually camp here, but it was the morning anyway. So I got packed up and kept on cruising from there. After getting to the top of Scotland at John O'Groats, then I kept on hitchhiking. I got a ride with a lorry driver again, leaving John O'Groats, and he really saved my butt because he was going a long ways through the Highlands of Scotland, and he took me, like, I guess it was all day or something. He was driving around making furniture deliveries at various very remote places in the northwestern part of Scotland there. And so I got to, have kind of this tour of the remote areas of Scotland, and he just kind of drove through and made his deliveries, and then we kept on driving, and then he was ultimately stopping in a major city somewhere, dropped me off there, and then I was hitching from there to the ferry to catch over to Ireland. I got over to Ireland, to Belfast in Northern Ireland, and then hitchhiked across to Galway, and then I actually skipped going to Dublin on that trip. And then got down to Southern Ireland, where the ferry starts from there, going over to France. And that is where I started my Eurail pass, which would last for the next 2 months. And so I caught the ferry from somewhere in Southern Ireland across to Le Havre, France, and from there took a train to Paris. I met a couple of American guys on the ferry going to France, and we ended up taking the train together, got to Paris, as I mentioned, ended up splitting a hotel room there with those guys. I can vaguely remember walking around Paris with the two guys looking for a hotel for the night. So I guess we didn't have a specific place in mind, or maybe we'd also found a place in the guidebook and we were looking for that specific hotel. But I just remember, wandering around, and maybe we checked out a couple of hotels and asked the prices. And so you would have spent a lot more of your time in the course of your travels just trying to find where you were going to stay for the night, getting lost and not having a place reserved, maybe looking for a specific place and then getting lost down these cobblestone lanes and the various, mazes of these old cities of Europe and stuff like that. And then you get there and they're full up, and then you have to do it all over again. Perhaps sometimes I would have made a reservation in advance, calling people, but making phone calls when you're in a foreign country back then was such a pain in the butt, because you would have to go to a payphone, and then you'd have to have all kinds of change, the local currency in coins, and then you got to figure out what the exact number is and how to dial it and stuff like that. And so that was a real pain in the butt. It would be easier really just to do your walking around thing and randomly look for hotels and stuff like that. And then calling home was the same sort of annoying situation with the payphones, in which you would have to have all this change, a lot more change. Maybe there was calling cards, I don't remember, but either way it was just a real pain in the butt to call and talk to your family, and then you'd have to keep it fairly short depending on how much change you had, and then otherwise was sending postcards. And so speaking of mail, then probably a lot of you don't even know about this situation. And so if you wanted family or friends to send you mail along the way, then the way that you did it is there were these offices, and there were like Thomas Cook, I think, or there were different companies, but they would be these offices that would handle mail. And people could send you mail to the address of this office, and then you stop by there and pick it up. And so it'd have to be like really specific timing. You'd have to, get in touch with your family somehow beforehand and let them know the addresses of the specific places that you're going to be going in the cities that you're going to. And then you'd have to get the timing exactly right, and then factor in how long it takes for mail to be mailed from the United States to Europe, and then stop by there and pick up your mail. And that was a very kind of exciting, experience along your trip, because you wouldn't have heard from anybody for weeks or whatever, and then you get this stack of letters from your friends and family and find out what's going on. And so the traveling experience was just very different, and in a way it was almost better in certain regards, because you didn't have this daily update of the news and knowing everything that's happening, seeing Facebook and getting emails and knowing exactly what's happening with your friends and family. You were kind of more just like out there in the depths of foreign lands by yourself, just kind of focused on the experience of being there and what you were experiencing that day, and all the challenges of getting to different places and finding where you're going to stay and all this kind of stuff. And then it would be this just kind of information, revelation when you get the letters and talk to family at home and find out what's actually going on and what people have been doing and getting news and stuff like that. And so you're just less distracted by all of the information that we have now of knowing what's happening everywhere in the world and what's happening with all of your friends and all that stuff. you're just kind of more focused on the here and now, being in the traveling experience. And then, as I said, then I started using the internet for the first time in 1996 and would use it just kind of every once in a while for random stuff. And then the first time that I got email, I remember, was in 1998. Then I went to India in the fall of 1999. That was when I really started using the internet and email more regularly and was sending back emails to my family regularly. I wasn't really using it to make reservations or anything like that, but that kind of began the new age of traveling, of making use of the internet and what it has become today, of it being such an integral part of the traveling experience. So anyways, as you can see, I'm here in my Airbnb, a really nice place. I changed locations from the last video that I showed where I was staying. I will talk more about where I am now in upcoming videos, but I'm going to be trying to tell more stories and stuff like that, get back to a little bit more regular upload schedule. I'm trying to figure out my upcoming travel plans, and they're looking like some possibilities of places that I might actually be able to travel to in the coming weeks, or at least a month or two, so we'll see about that. But take it easy, have a good one.